Team. We've got the team from Ecan, so I appreciate you coming along, and I'll hand over to you, Chair Scott.
Kiti riri ngā mihi nui tēnā koe mea konihira kai whakahari. It's good to be here. Went to Christchurch yesterday, come back down this morning, going back after this, so it's a bit of a road trip, a couple of days. But good to be here. Look, I had a session last week with Anne Monroe and her council, so I thought I'd just cover the same things that we talked about there, and really just an update on some of the things that we're dealing with, I guess, as a council, and you're probably aware of them. Nigel, in his role as the chair of the Mayoral Forum, will certainly be aware of some of these things, but they are issues that we have on our table at the moment. So the first of those is under NPSFM 2020, we are required to produce an updated land and water plan by December 2024, which we're working on at the moment. And in doing so, we've taken the provision to work with Runanga on a joint design process for that plan. And we're just about to daylight that planning piece. And rather than doing an updated land and water plan, our coastal plan hasn't been updated since 2000, so it's well overdue, and there's a lot of pressure on us to do some work on that. And there's also a lot of pressure on us actually to look at at some of our rivers on Te Mana o Te Wai, so the Manapa River, if you like. And they will be overarching themes, but we're going to concentrate on our regional policy statement. And the reason we're going to do that is because we can encompass quite a bit more work and be a bit more directive in how we go about that. And certainly the involvement of this council and other councils across Canterbury will be important. And you will be aware, I guess, of the RMA process around the spatial planning, that there is a regional planning committee, and that's the first task. So the regional planning committee's first task is to produce an overarching plan. The regional policy statement is a key piece of that. We think that if we can get in there and attack that now, then that makes it quite easy for us to accept how we go forward. The problem that we have with the RMA, I'll talk about the RMA separately, but the problem we have with the RMA process is that when you point to the regional planning committee, and look, sorry, I should have said Dion's here with me, and that's to increase the intelligence in the room from Canterbury. Because he certainly is.
I'm Dion anyway. I'm councillor Christchurch West, but I'm actually on the OTOP committee with Councillor Pai. So I was here yesterday for a councillor catch up with all the OTOP people, and there's a few events here down in some farms that I'll be going to after this. And I was just saying, I'm not sure I've got the right shoes to go on the farms, but we'll deal with that. So yeah.
He didn't kick me early enough. Sorry, my apologies for that.
That's okay.
So the land and water plan is a piece of work that's underway. We are probably late in getting that done, but our desire, I guess, to work with Runanga on that was there. All the legislation, as you will know, that we have to deal with points to the fact that we need to do that, and we need to do that properly, and that's what we're doing. We think we're on that track, and in line with that, I've undertaken the responsibility with the chairs of the Runanga, the 10 Runanga, to communicate directly with them. So they now have an open opportunity with myself to do that, and on a weekly basis I'm informing them of where we're at and where the hard bits are. The problem that we have, of course, with such a large staff is we've got 800 people that work for us now, 800 full-time equivalents, not 800 pairs of feet under the desk every day, is that there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of people required to do a lot of things, and it's very easy to get the Chinese whispers going, and then people get upset, and you get stuff coming around the outside, and then you get all that stuff. So I've undertaken to talk directly with the Runanga chairs on a weekly basis to try and take some of that out and take that responsibility on behalf of Environment Canterbury. And I think that's going to work pretty well, because it's a good forum for us to then not only be a direct commentary, but also to put some of the organisation's commentary into that. And I just said to Nigel pretty quickly, I think we're going to do the same thing with mayors, but probably on a 2-monthly basis, so that you're aware of the bits of work that we're doing. A lot of it sometimes doesn't get daylighted, and we might take it to the Mayoral Forum, but you guys don't get to hear about it. And I think that if we expect to put pressure on ministers and central government, the more of us that do that, the better, because everyone has that opportunity to do that. So, off on down a rabbit hole right at the start here. I'm not sticking to what I said I was going to say. But yeah, so the land and water plan is important to us. The RMA process is one that the Ministry for the Environment are really keen for us to be involved in that first tranche of the RMA reforms. So Canterbury as a region to pick that up. It's something that we've spoken about at the Mayoral Forum. It's something that the mayors were going, yeah, that's a great idea, we should do that. And now I think there's not so much, Nigel? Not so much. And of course the Renanga, they're a bit the same, but when they find out what it involves, they may not be that keen. It's a massive piece of work that will require a lot more staff than we have, and our problem with that is unless some of this stuff is resourced properly in terms of people and access to people, and that means you having access to people too, to do that, the work that's required, then we're not prepared to do that. And, you know, we all know that the issue that we have at the moment is our plates are loaded. Central government keep putting stuff on our plate, and they expect your ratepayers and our ratepayers, the same people, to keep paying that. And we're to a certain extent saying, look, you know, we're not in this anymore. We don't want to be part of this. So we're going to take a reasonably hard line on that. They could mandate it, and I think the problem with it being mandated then is that it would be under-resourced, and then we probably wouldn't do it properly, because the first tranche is the opportunity to find out where all the holes are. So we've got some scepticism around that, and the scepticism we also have around that is that the Adaptive Planning Act hasn't there yet, it isn't daylighted yet, and the three things are supposed to work together, and they're going to interfere across the stuff that we do. So, you know, there's some concerns there. I'm not the oracle on all of this, but I'm just the messenger on all of this at the moment. But we'll keep updated about that. There's a piece of work that we brought to the Mayoral Forum, Nigel. I don't know if you've shared that, but I mean, we're more than happy to share that with your councillors to see if that will show you where some of the concerns are, and we'll just work our way through that. We've taken on board that we will come back to the Mayoral Forum and just provide some more information. Is that right, Nigel? And what I'm saying right? Yeah. There's not a blanket no at this point in time, but there's a blanket we are concerned about this process.
Yeah, look, I think if you're reading the room, I'm expecting a no, but I think we're keen to be more informed, and I think that was from your sort of Stephanie's lead. Yeah, and you know, I guess one of the things that we've shared in the past month is that, you know, our interaction with ministers, and we went to Wellington and we met with 9 ministers, how complimentary they were of the governments of Canterbury. That's not just us, that's you guys too. So they see that we're reasonably coherent. Most of us are usually on the same page. We're like everything, you know, things fall off. But in the sense of how lined up we are, they're really keen to deal with us. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Minister wants to possibly push us over the edge, but we'll see where we go with that. And that won't be a decision that we will take. And that then leads, I guess, to the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the future for local government, which is a concern for everybody. You know, actually in the regional sector, where we have the 16 entities of the regional councils get together, it's one of the things that I'm picking up in terms of a sort of a semi-lead for is the future for local government discussions and where we go with that. We had we had a report on that. The report's is it due out now, isn't it? 21st?
20th or 21st, it's in the next week or so, is my understanding.
Yeah, so I won't say too much more about that because you can take your own opinions out of that, but it seems that that's going to be a bit more pointed in terms of what it thinks and what it says. You know, if you want my read on it, they're saying entities of at least 75,000 people as being the ideal size to have some sort of continuity across services and people, and so how that works. So I don't know how that's working. I'm agnostic about it. As the chair of the regional council, we don't particularly care about it, what it looks like. The thing that we're really deeply concerned about is the services that we provide. And as I said, we've got 800 people, they don't do nothing. They're providing services for Canterbury. And so we need to ensure, yeah, you might go, need to ensure that, yeah, I know. We need to ensure that those services are maintained, and you know, we keep getting told as a regional council how we're doing things wrong, how nitrates and all that stuff that keeps going on all the time. We can't run buses, we can't kill wallabies, you know, our lakes are going to shit on us and all the rest of it. That's our job, that's what we do, and we're reasonably good at it. You know, and ministers have been complimentary to us. Now, if you take that out, if you suck all that out and say, well, who's going to pick that up? Who's going to pick that up from a regional view? You know, I'm not sure. I think Christchurch has got a very good view on it. I mean, they think like a super council would be good.
Yeah, and I think that's why the likes of Ashburton is leaning south, because it doesn't want to get gobbled up by the Greater Christchurch. But one thing for the future of local government, I think, where we didn't feel they were looking too hard at structure, you know, it sounds like in the report that there might be some recommendations in that space, which we didn't sort of think was going to come, but, you know, that could be to Chair Scott's point is, hey, no less than 75,000 for a council moving forward. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I bumped into the chair of the work, well, the people doing the work, and because I was doing a paper on structure of local government, and they were talking, he was mentioning that they're going to have some very strong recommendations, but they're not going to recommend that anything is done immediately, but what they want to do is set up a working group that is actually tasked, probably within DIA, to actually start looking at the structure of local government. So that's probably the way it'll work, but it's going to be really interesting how they're going to frame it, because I do feel that they want to bring things together. So they're not looking at from what I was saying to them, is they're not actually looking at the problem. I don't think they've actually really nailed the problem, which is the funding for local government. And I think as a sector, we all need to be going, well, you know, the problem is actually you're putting more stuff onto local government, and we don't actually have the ability to fund that rather than making more rates. So that's the pushback I think we need to be doing.
Yeah, I think Canterbury's challenged on the margins, so we're challenged in the south, we're challenged in the north. And you know, 35% of Canterbury's here. That's in South Canterbury. 35% of it. And you've got 67,000 people maybe. We get a few of those fellows from the other side of the river, adds it up a bit more. But then again, the biggest issue that we have, and the biggest issue that's going to confront everybody, is where are the boundaries? What do the boundaries look like? Your mate Kircher said he wants, if we have 6 entities, he wants to go this way. Where's his boundary? You know, what Otago say about that? And if we do future for local government, does that mean that's part of Canterbury? I mean, there's all that stuff there. And then if you look at Ngāi Tahu to the north, just an absolutely confused boundary doesn't depend on whose eyes you're looking through. If you're in Marlborough or Tasman or not so much Nelson, but the boundary, the Ngāi Tahu boundary pushes north, and it's over our boundary. So there's a whole lot of that stuff there, and I know that to get anything around like a Takiwā boundary, which we were quite happy about actually, because it gave us a sense of getting a relationship with Otago and Southland and the coast, which we have got a really good relationship with them. It made it quite simple for us. But then we weren't aware of all these other things that are coming along. So, like, there's how many conversations are going on here? Like, there's a lot of conversations going on here, and that's the confusion. And I think that's why we need to daylight some of that stuff. We tend to have those conversations ourselves up there. I think that this is any. Have we got a report in here? Because I'll be
Being live streamed.
Oh, we're live streamed. I'm not going to say that then. I was going to be disrespectful. Look, I think there's a lot of tension here in terms of what people want. There are people sitting back not getting involved in it because they've got some size about them, and they think that some of the cards, when they fall, they'll fall to them. But it's really important that the decent conversation is held with the likes of, you know, with Craig Macklin, Kaikoura, and with Murray Black, and with Anne, and with Craig down here, and also Gary, because they're on the fringe. Like, you know, when you've only got 2,200 ratepayers like Kaikoura have got, and you've got a reasonable sized district, it becomes difficult. And the other thing is, like, you know, how many times you go to Kaikoura every year? Like, how many times you go to the Clarence River? So that's our northern boundary. Our southern boundaries are Lindis, when you go over the top of Lindis. So it's a big piece of space, and we can't just say we're going to do it because of economic reasons.
I find it interesting that structure has actually come out so heavily through that report, unless they've thrown it in there themselves. I don't think that would have come out with many conversations, maybe to your point, driven by some of the larger ones.
Well, I think my thing here, Nigel, doesn't matter how you think about it. The underlying thing from this government is that the engagement with hapu iwi across, and look, it's simple. It's reasonably simple for us. North Island is very complex operation, but if, you know, and I might be 100% wrong on this, but if we're leaning to the fact to say, and co-governance is not a nice word to have because the connotations around that are ridiculous, so we're not going to go there. But if we're going to have takiwā boundaries, then if they're going to be something, and they pointed to in all the legislation we're doing, Randerson had 700 references in the Randerson report to mana whenua engagement and process. Then to me, someone thinks that's important. So I would think that boundaries are really important, and boundaries may be something that we have to discuss sooner rather than later.
I think they're important currently politically, but will they be important after the election? It's an interesting one to know, and that's
the big unknown at the moment. Yeah. I mean, the reality, just the reality is that the local government sector is being changed by stealth at the moment. Anyway, you've got Three Waters, whatever that's now called, and you've got RMA reforms are taking a big chunk of the workload from local government sector. So it's being driven by stealth. So I think the report may, it'll be really interesting to see how they factor that in, because what will a lot of staff do, and who are they going to work for, and how's that going to be structured?
Yeah, people go to their corners on this stuff, don't they? If they think they're threatened, they'll go to their corner and they don't want to talk about it, and it's hard to talk about. But I think some of that basic stuff that we need to understand on how we actually step forward into this and have the decent conversation, we need to have those base conversations first. Because, if you say, look, if we stand, I'll get you four guys in the room from South Canterbury, the South Rangatata people, and say, look, we're going to reform local government here. How's that conversation going to go for a start for 10? Because people are going to go, well, you're not taking away the things that we do, because my community is important to me, and I'm going to stand up there and I'm going to fight for them and all the rest of it, which is fair. That's fair. That's why you're elected. That's why you're here. No one's going to roll over for that. But we need to have a different conversation about that.
Yeah, look, and I don't think it would be as hard as you think. It's how far you want to take it, and structure doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of democracy. And I think as long as you hold democracy on high, then that's probably the key thing. And that's what I question with this report. If actually democracy's been one of the priorities through this, I doubt it has.
A lot of a nest of snakes, though, really, isn't it? Like future for local government. So you're well aware of that. So there's a couple of other things here that we should talk about. One is the freshwater farm planning regulations were daylighted last week by mistake by the government. We didn't have time to have a consultation process on them. They took the regulations to parliamentary services, and up until last week they're under a non-disclosure agreement. So there's maybe 25 people in New Zealand knew what were going to be in the regulations. And they took to parliamentary services and they said, look, we just, these are the regulations. And they said, thank you very much. And they published them. And they said, oh, we don't want you to publish them. And they said, you've given them to us. This is now our job. It's not your job anymore. You've lost control of them. So that's what happened. So we had people racing around last week making apologies and all, but they're there, they're on the website. The thing that isn't clear to us is the order in council that needs to accompany these, which is about how this will be rolled out. We already know that the first tranche of those things are going to be done by, I think, Southland and I forget the other.
Waikato.
And Waikato, yeah. So they're involved in that process at the moment. They seem to think, oh, yeah, it's not too bad, but when we've looked at it, we think that it is a bit complicated. for us. We think that if we get the opportunity with the Ordering Council to work in a more bespoke manner rather than chuck a blanket over Canterbury, that's what you've got to do. So a more bespoke manner which takes into account those areas that haven't got any planning at all, so where the risk is. And we keep saying to them, I've been saying to the Minister, look, this is about risk, it's about alleviating risk from agricultural activities. We've already got farm plans in place, which is an audited process and a grading process associated with that. There's a lot of people in Canterbury hooked into that. And then we've got farm management plans, which others have got, which they don't meet some of the thresholds. And there's a lot of people without anything. So let us do the thing. Let us look at where the risk is and touch that. We think we might have made some progress on that, but if not, everyone's going to have to start again. So not start again, but Michelle, don't shake your head. It becomes, and Stacey, don't shake your head. It becomes difficult, and so we're trying to be. On one hand, they say, "Oh, you've done such a good job, and you're well ahead of everyone else." And on the other job, we're saying, "Well, actually, we know a wee bit about this." So we're going to see where we get to with that. We're not. There's no requirement for us to get involved in that process until 2025. So we've got some time to work our way through that. And as someone referred to, we may have another.
There will be a lot of angst coming from the farming community. So probably the takeaway is that the farm plans, we've already got some, and we're not in the tranche until 2025. But as people start talking, there will be quite a lot of angst because if you go and have a look at the legislation, it is extremely prescriptive and very punitive as well. There's a lot of, if you don't do this, you will be fined that. If you don't do that, you will be fined this, and so there will be a lot of angst from the communities around that. But just 2025 is when we have to start doing that, so there is a bit of time to work through it.
And then going along with that, I guess is. Look, they may cop a bit about consenting. Some people in this room have consents. Some people know the difficulty that we're going through at the moment to get our way through that. And there's no excuses here, not from my point of view. It's just an explanation of why. And why is pretty involved. A lot of it's to do with the fact that some consents are not prepared properly and they come in and go out for more information. Some consents need to be adjusted according to case law as it evolves. So as case law evolves, if you've got a consent in process, then that has to be taken into account. And just about all consents are regulated by national environmental standards and also plans. So there's a lot of that going on. However, that is the complicating issue, but the issue that we're taking responsible, when I say we, and we're not it's the royal we, it's Stephanie and her team, is that we have a complicated process. Too many steps involved, too much time, costs too much money. We have a lot of consents. We keep saying, look, we've got 26,500 consents or something. We have a lot of consents. We have have a movement through ECAN every year, 1,500, 2,000 consents come through and then there's the new ones that come in place, and that might be another couple of hundred a year. So it is a very involved space in terms of getting that stuff done. So everything, when things change, it does complicate things. However, Stephanie's put her hand up for how sticky it is in that process, and she's gone in there and pretty much sorted out. I think we have 1,000 consents that were tracked, if you like. It's like Middle Earth, this is where we are. But I think we're down 300. So there's been a lot of work done on that space. I'm a person that's got a consent tracked with an ECAN.
So can you talk about it?
Yeah, no, I can't. I've actually got two consents.
Oh my goodness gracious!
I think I've just put a line under the fact that it might not come out anytime soon now. But yeah, it's the same. And then I was talking to Michelle, and we share an issue with LINZ. So there's other agencies that hold our processes up, like LINZ. If you're on leased land and you need the approval of LINZ to do something, it takes forever. I mean, base job is drawing maps, and they don't seem to want to get involved in doing some of the work they should do. And so, you know, there's something like 150 to 200,000 hectares of land across Canterbury that's involved in multiple. So we've got some docks, got some lands, got some, and people lease it and essentially do a good job with it, keeping things under control there. But it does become complicated. So hands up that hopefully within the next 6 months we'll get through that and we'll be more efficient.
Yeah,
And you've heard the criticism of me before about that, Nigel. Were you one of the ones criticising?
No, I didn't criticize you.
Was it Buddy Brown? Was it? Brown.
Yeah, MPS for fresh water has obviously had a big impact on the way that consents have to be processed, and there is a lot of work now underway to try and get those sticky consents out of the way so that the easier ones can just actually go through, because it's the issue that been focusing a lot on the ones that have been tricky and just keep focusing on it, and everything else is just piled up. So there has been a workload or a work program structure change to actually try and tip that around and say those easy ones can just fly through while those other ones can still get a bit of work done. So hopefully, you start seeing some of those start to filter through.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a matter of trying to be a bit more efficient with that, and I think they'll get there. To that extent, we've had we've just appointed our new director of operations, which is a big search. I think we had 120 people apply for the job, which is massive. I'm trying to think of his name, actually. But he was the CEO for Next Foundation, who's doing that work up in Mount Hurtney, up in Aoraki. And he starts in September, and with a background, had worked for us in 2007, 2008, and went to Taranaki Regional Council, and he still held some involvement with wildings. So he's still involved in that process. He's got a biodiversity, biosecurity background, and quite strong, I think, in the consent monitoring and enforcement area. So that will help us in terms of our relationship. So that's a big hole to fill, which we're really looking forward to, and again can help us with some of this practical stuff around consenting and how we do that. Yeah. And wildings and wallabies, we're still pushing pretty hard with ministers. Had a no from Willagene Prime about coming to talk to us about wilding pines, but we'll see how we go with that. We'll keep pushing on that. Resilience, talk about that, Nigel? So you'll probably be aware that Te Urukahika, which is the regional sector, went to central government in 2000, and just before, actually just COVID broke with shovel-ready products and river resilience. So in Rangata's got some of that money for the work that's been done out there, and so we've pretty much been good stewards of that money all the way through. But that actually followed out of a piece of work that Kanoa was doing about, you haven't been in this space since 1989. You need to get back into this space because we're struggling here about getting money off ratepayers to do this job properly. 68 farmers keep the Rangatata in its river, in its bed. 20 farmers keep the Pariora, that whole argument. And so we went to them with a proposal for a budget line of 275 million for the country. It's the single biggest event that causes damage in the country, is flooding. It's more occurrences of flooding every year than anything. And the things that are emerging from, so we actually didn't get the money. So we went to the government and they just said no. They didn't even say no, they didn't say anything actually, which we've reacted to and sort of meeting with Kiramaka Nolti and Kiritapu Allen, myself and Darren Ponter, who's the chairman of Wellington Regional Council, and hopefully next week we'll go up there and have a talk to them about that, because you don't mind if you say no, we're not going to do this because this is what we're doing, right? But it was just a no. And I had a bit of a complaint and got in the newspaper about it last week and got some feedback from DIA that they were pissed off with me because I was criticising them. But when someone says no, you're allowed to criticise them, aren't you? I mean, I feel so.
It's your job.
Anyway, so we got a reaction from them. So hopefully we're going to do that. Now, essentially, that allows us then to go and do those pieces of work that need to be done. Yeah. And you're interested, aren't you?
Look, and following up on that, all councils across Canterbury should be interested. One, because it goes back to for Timaru we had the Rangitata event, and we don't have that investment quite to the extent that it needs to be to protect for from the next event. But all councils, this is important for all councils in resiliency space, and also the Greater South Island. We need to be supporting ECAN in this space. So, if we do get that co-funding, when it comes to a point where through LTPs or annual plan, you guys are going to the ratepayer saying we need to do targeted rates to support this, well then we need to be 100% behind them, because it's a piece of work that has to be done. So we need to be, hand in hand on this piece of work. Yeah, and it's so important for our communities.
Yeah, so the other point about this is that the people, so we went to government and said, look, we didn't do the begging bowl thing because it just doesn't seem to work, because you can turn a begging bowl by saying no, but we went to them and said, look, there's an opportunity here for co-invest in infrastructure across the South Island, which is Kiwirail's bridges, Wakatahi's bridges, Transpower's connection across the rivers, Chorus, and then there are other like networks. What do you call your network provider? Alpine, yeah, Alpine's lines and all those sorts of things that go across rivers. But the other party to this, which is starting to emerge, is the Insurance Council, because the Insurance Council have always made it clear that as long as we were doing the things that we needed to do to protect communities, then they would turn up, they would play their part. And the problem that we have in Canterbury is that we've been pretty good at rivers, and we probably haven't had the periods of rain that we're getting like we have now. But we've built on floodplains. We've closed rivers down a bit, and we've built on floodplains. And the classic is in Ashburton. If you go into the industrial area in Ashburton, where all those you turn by Mile 10 there and then go down onto the floodplain, you see the amount of investment there, and that's because of the security that they felt building next to a stop bank. So the point that we're saying to central government, disruption to this stuff, if the insurance council companies pull out, is going to be massive, and disruption to you guys in terms of that's GDP provider up there. Where are they going to go? They're going to go up to Roxton on the shingle up there, and I don't know. So probably Nigel. But that's the argument.
Can I butt in for a
Yeah,
second?
you can.
Yeah, so the other issue that's playing here is the third part to the RMA reforms, and so the climate adaptation bill, and so the minister has explicitly said that is not going to be on the table before the election, and so they're going to rush through the two parts of the RMA probably through the next 19 days that they've got sitting, and then this third part, which is around the funding for a lot of this work, is just sitting in the ether, and so while that's sitting in the ether at the moment, something may happen, and the cynic in me is going, well, maybe the government wants to have an event and they can get on the front page because they dish out money for a recovery, but there's not the same energy being placed into the resilience part and the funding to get the work done in the first place. So hopefully, if we can actually start working together, we can push a lot of that work in that third part of the bill, because that's critical for what we're dealing with, and as well as the coastlines that we've got here, the work that needs to happen on our coastlines is just as important as the rivers. So, and that's all tied up with that third part of the legislation. Without that, we don't know where we're going, because we could do a whole lot of work, and then the government comes in and said, well, actually, that's not what we want, and that's not part of the rules anymore.
Look, I've actually taken up half an hour of your time. If you've got some questions, I'm more than happy to answer that. If you've got some things that you want to know. I was going to talk about my way in GPS and a few of those things, but
That's cool. We can pick that up in questions if anyone's got something specific to transport. Questions for Peter and Dion?
Thank you very much. Very cheap for my children.
well, yeah. Well, the issue with my I was going to bring up with you is you've got a consumptive model here, which requires this council put a lot of money in a lot of support and more than support anywhere. And we've got, we've got Wakatai going, oh, it's a trial. And the reason they're saying that is because they haven't got enough cash to start this up in other places. I think we're going to, I think we're going to have to make a bit of a noise towards the end of the year about this, because we can't keep having My Way as a trial. And I think that the thing that you guys are going to have to think about is that we're happy, we think it's great, but you're going to think about is, how much impost on the ratepayer will it stand? The fair trial at the moment, the way it's built, we've left My Way out of it, other than I think disability. The disability one, I think we're going to pick up, because you'll get overwhelmed. Free fares for kids. You won't have enough My Way buses to do the things they want to do.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I was speaking with Ashburton Council the other day on the plan for Canterbury. They just wanted to talk about My Way. So, every district that doesn't have public transport now wants this model. So it is something that government's going to have to start thinking about pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I was talking to Andrew Dixon before about this, and Andrew and I were part of the group that went around and looked at the services, and the thing that getting to us in Christchurch now is accessibility of older people, where they can't walk to the bus stop and they can go a car, and so like it's the taxi thing, and the taxi's like $40 to get there, we're $1, so up there, so they need some sort of bespoke service also. So yeah, it's an interesting space. And the GPS, the government policy statement on transport, for whatever reason, missed cabinet, and so if it doesn't get to cabinet, we might not get it before the next election. And I think it was going to be pushing at public transport, and that's our indication. So if it gets held up, then we're in limbo for another 4, 5, 6 months probably.
Oh, it's just my question was around funding, and you may have just spoke about it, but obviously Wakatai, they're actually chucking a bit of money in at the moment, and I understand that's only on a very short-term basis. So can we, obviously who knows how long that's going to last, and so someone's going to have to pick up the tab, I suppose, if when eventually they say they perhaps potentially could withdraw that support. What do you got to say about that?
I think what we're going to end up. So the other thing that's happening with central government at the moment, and they hope to get this through the House, and they hope to get a whole lot of stuff through the House, and they're running out of days to get anything through the bloody House. Actually,
19.
How many?
19 days.
They got 19 days left. So the public transport operating model, which was put into place to run the buses, whereby we don't get too deep into this, but essentially it is a systematic way that we, as a regional council, have to run the buses. They're looking at pushing that out and allowing us the opportunity to actually get right in there and own the buses, and own the infrastructure, and own the bus depots and the charging spots and all the rest of it. The interesting thing about that will be, what will it look like for My Way? Because one of the things that you say to yourself about My Way is those vans are too big in some cases. Maybe because there's only 1 or 2 people on them, why haven't got a minivan? There's more opportunity around that. Like in Sydney, they run cars in places, just a car, go around and pick people up. So that opportunity, I think, is there, and you need to be ready for that. But again, if the House doesn't go before the House, it's not going to get done.
I guess that was another point, the fact that there's only 2 or 3 people at the max in these vans running around, and obviously you've just mentioned that perhaps a smaller vehicle or a lower cost operation, if you know what I mean, and perhaps and it's pretty flexible, but still it's costing per ride probably up to $60 per person.
Yeah,
and we're getting $2.50
it
back,
is.
and so there's actually got to be a lot more. We need to be, I guess, continually trying to evolve this thing to meet the need while actually ensuring that the money's actually sensible.
And the reason for that, Alan, is the fact that My Way was procured under the public transport operating model, and so therefore the costs that come with that are there. There's a margin there on it. There's all those things that you do in business when you go and do that. Like the big bus models, a 9-year model, so they'll cost a route. We need 6 buses on Route 17, and the contract's for 9 years. So they get all the recovery and all their maintenance and all that stuff over that 9-year period. And it's like who bids the best, who gets it. If you're operating yourself on a system that you can control, then some of those costs become more transparent.
Yeah, I think the challenge is you can't have targets for health to keep people in their homes longer and not provide access back to health facilities. And so they work hand in hand again, don't they, health and transport in this space.
Yeah, so the integration of those services, and we tried to take this up with Alicia Beryl, but we ran out of time. I don't know who asked her the question, but it took half an hour to answer the bloody thing. But that's the point. The integration of services across those areas is what's the requirement. So when you get to final order now talk about localism, or how are you going to be, what's the localism mean? If it's, let's say it's Rakaia the Waitaki, that's a localism. You go back and forth. How do people actually get to where they need to get to? Because there's some sense that public transport should intersect with them there somewhere to be more efficient. Otherwise, you just centralise things and send people up to one place. I don't know whether they thought about that or not. Anyway, thank you.
Alrighty, thanks team. Thanks Dion, appreciate that. Thanks for being part of OTOP too. Great to have someone from Central Christchurch on this.
And just before we go, there's a drop-in event at the Caroline Bay Trust Aoraki Centre at 4 o'clock for the work that the strategy that ECAN is doing around the Washdyke Lagoon. That's starting today, so if anybody wants to pop into that, there's going to be a whole lot of info going on.
Brilliant.
Just a little plug.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Dion.
Role of elected officials during emergency response and also during peacetime. So once again, I'll pass straight to James so he can crack into his delivery, but once again, there'll be opportunities for questions for both of us throughout the session.
Yeah, please do ask questions as we go rather than waiting to the end if they come up. It's always good to be able to present to councillors about, the role in an emergency. It's a time that responsibilities change, and so it's important that you're aware of them. So let's just jump through this pretty quickly. We'll talk a wee bit about the structure of civil defence emergency management, just so you understand that, and then how that structure changes during an emergency, and the declaration process. And there's just the cover of the book I just handed out there. It's just a wee guide that the Canterbury CDM group produced. We actually borrowed it from Otago and updated it, but that's just a reference document for you on that role. Great little statement here. This was Geoffrey Palmer back when he was the Prime Minister for that very short period of time. Sometimes does a power of good to remind ourselves that we live where two tectonic plates meet, that Tom was talking about earlier, in a somewhat lonely stretch of windswept ocean just above the roaring 40s. If you want drama, you've come to the right place. That's our country. So, in Canterbury, here's just a list of various emergencies that we've had, and it's not fully up to date actually, but damage-causing emergencies in our distant and recent history. And you can see there that floods are certainly top of the list. But storms, they're up there, fires are up there. They're all events that we see on a reasonably regular basis. We have to have a Civil Defence Emergency Management Group plan. We updated this last year and got approval for it to be updated. And it really just goes through just outlining at very strategic level how we approach the social side of managing emergencies, the economic and the environmental side of what we need to do. And within it, there are goals, objectives and targets that we have to meet. And Timaru District Council, as part of that membership of the CDEP group, also has to try and meet those goals and targets. And then it outlines the sort of the administrative arrangements, or what we call comprehensive emergency management, which is reduction, readiness, response and recovery. We'll go into that a little bit more detail. So in BAU, we'll start at the bottom, the most important place, we've got community. That's where Civil Defence Emergency Management starts, and that's why we engage with our communities so much about readiness to disasters of various sorts and get them to understand our hazards. Then moves up to our territorial authorities, the regional level and then the national level. And so that sort of structure is pretty embedded and seems to be the way that we do things. But when we look at the CDM group, it's sort of in that sort of particularly regional, local space, we have a Civil Defence Joint Committee or Group Joint Committee. And that's where our political leaders, our mayors, or delegated councillors sit and provide that sort of really high-level strategic governance to what we do. And so, Nigel, you sit on that and support us with what we do. Going down, we have the Coordinating Executive Group, where all our chief executives sit, and Bede's our chair at the moment. But it's not just the local authorities, it's our emergency service partners and a couple of government organisations like MPI sit on that and provide that strategic planning, strategic leadership for us. Then have the group office where I sit, really providing that sort of regional coordination across the group or across the Canterbury area. Supporting Phil in the decisions and the activities that he needs to do, as well as the emergency managers and all our other councils. And below that we have each of our councils, and each of those have civil defence officers that do the same sort of work that Phil and Lamorna do. And lots of partners. So Lifeline's district health boards are Te Whati Ora now, emergency services, iwi, and that sort of thing. So they all come and help support what we do. It's definitely not just a local government thing. It is a all of society thing almost. And just quickly on NEMA. So NEMA is the National Emergency Management Agency. They're the national partner in all of this. It's just worth knowing that they've existed now for almost 2 years. They started with about 60 staff and rapidly increased to about 160. And that's put extra demands on us at local government level. And yet our local government structures haven't changed to meet those national structures. So just something to be aware of. There's a lot more pressure at that national level coming down, like you were seeing everywhere else and was just talked about. We're seeing it too in that civil defence emergency management space. Quickly into that reduction, readiness, response, and recovery space, just section 64 talks about the responsibilities of local authorities, so that's territorials as well as regional. We've got to have plans, and more importantly there, you need to be able to ensure that you can function to your fullest during an emergency. That may mean that it's at a reduced level, but you still have a responsibility to be able to do those core local government duties that we have. And so, we always encourage and talk about business continuity planning. It's something we talk about with businesses a lot. It's also something that's worth council just having a think about. And I'm not necessarily going to say that your emergency manager should do it. They've already got another job to do, but do think about business continuity and how you can keep functioning when a disaster happens. The reduction space, interestingly here, the statistics are that, you know, every dollar we spend on reduction saves about $8 in recovery. And we're seeing that in places like, you know, Esk Valley and Hawke's Bay right now. You know, the cost of people living in the places that they were living in is expensive when disasters happen. So we have a responsibility, and we mainly do it through the planning instruments that we have as councils, to identify and reduce the cost of emergencies where we can. It's always a tough one because, you know, we want to make sure that we have thriving communities and we're developing, but we've also got to make sure that we're not putting people at harm if we can avoid it. But really, from a civil defence point of view, we've only got an advocacy role. Although it's spelled out that we should be doing it, we've got no levers or no mechanisms that we can actually use. They really do sit in that planning space and through other mechanisms that councils have. Through into the readiness space, it's all about planning and preparation. That's what we spend most of our time doing, is being ready to respond to the emergencies and then to be ready to recover. But this is also where we work with our communities in one way or another to support them about being ready. You know, and we talked about, you know, with the AF8 space this morning, you know, one of the things I suggested was, you know, storing more water. That's a readiness activity that we try to encourage. And, you know, thinking about how you might, you know, repurpose your gas barbecue to actually cook your meals at night time should there be no electricity or no power. That's all in that space. And then response when we actually do ramp up, something's happened and we need to respond to that emergency. So what's the extent of what we do? Most of our work, if I can say the bread and butter, is in that natural hazard space. But we also get involved in quite a few other events that are often very challenging. So, you know, in Christchurch, the mosque shooting, for example, we were involved a lot in supporting the Muslim community through that event. In other parts of the country, M. Bovis response and the Velvet Leaf response took up a lot of emergency management time in supporting those other government agencies, particularly MPI, in dealing with that. And hazardous chemical spills, and, you know, the electroplating place here in Timaru was one such case of that quite a few years ago now. So in an emergency, the structure doesn't really change that much. It's still community-led, it's still community-driven. And the more that our community can look after itself, the easier it is for all of us. But then as we move up through that system, we might have a local incident control point. That's more likely to be something that police, FENS, or one of the emergency service partners do. Then through to a local EOC, the Regional Coordination Centre, or the National Coordination Centre. So you've got that hierarchical structure there. Just being aware, you know, that regional level where I work, it's more about coordination, it's more about supporting what you're delivering into your communities at a local level. You know, so coordination and support. But if we have to, we can direct. And likewise, at a national level, if there's a national emergency, the national controller can direct us all to do something in a particular way. So we've got to be ready for that. Just on states of emergency, there are only two forms of states of emergency. There's a national state of emergency or a local state of emergency. There actually isn't any such thing as a regional state of emergency. So local can be done for the region, the territorial authority, or a ward, or any combination thereof. And so when it's done, the geographic area must be identified. We must actually spell out that area. And the group controller, so if there was a declaration made here, say in Timaru, I actually become in charge, but my powers are delegated to Phil or one of the other Timaru controllers. So they're delegated down. When that happens, we get legislative protection, so we're protected against the decisions we make, apart from in the health and safety space. So we still have to take care of health and safety as we would. That does not change. And we can activate without a state of emergency. So quite often, at the start of an event or during a smaller event, we'll be activated at an emergency operations centre or the coordination centre, but we won't actually have any powers to make any decisions. We're just there supporting it. And just some quick examples, I'm going to fly through these really quickly. The COVID-19 response, that was a national state of emergency. Here's some the flooding around that. Where was this? This was not Ashburton. Yeah, 21. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So local state of emergency, but done regionally. And in that regional one for that 21 floodings, it actually started with Ashburton declaring a local for Ashburton first. Timaru followed quite quickly, and then Selwyn, and then eventually there was a regional one because it was impacting the whole of the region, put across all of us. It actually had some really complicating factors later on as we moved into recovery and how we actually managed that. But I won't talk too much about that today. So yeah, some of the Rangatata flooding, 2017, and then July 22, which was one of the last ones here in Timaru, at Mill Road, where a very small ward-based declaration was made because some people wouldn't leave their homes and it was felt that they're unsafe being there, so we needed to use the evacuation power. So there's quite a conversation. I think, Nigel, you were away at the time, weren't you? But with, who's your deputy mayor?
Yeah, I was Deputy Mayor Will Steve. He's not with us now.
Yeah.
Not with us in regard to around the table. He's still with us.
Yeah. So, and so Bede and Paul Cooper were all involved in those discussions to support what we would do to, make sure that we protected these people. The process itself, yeah.
Sorry, James, maybe just worth noting that you can't do anything. You could persuade them, but it was only, and they didn't want to take it, it was only when you had a state of emergency that we could actually had the power to go and get these people and say you've now got to leave, and that was why we had to exercise the state of emergency.
Yeah.
And I think it's, in our case, a ward is as small as we can go because you have to be able to define the area, and so a ward is something that has a distinct definition and boundary, but that was why, so that they had originally left, came back, and then so the only way you can then manage it is by declaring a state of emergency.
And that forced evacuation actually results in the police having to arrest them. So it's not just a simple case of saying you can move on now. If we need to, we actually have to arrest them. So if you're sort of thinking in those larger scale events, and tsunami would be our worst case, we might tell people to evacuate and we can enforce it, but the realities are we don't have the resourcing to go and enforce it from the point of view of arresting people. So it's not just that straightforward all the time.
It's probably more likely the Milford huts where that's going to be a benefit into the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course we had that conversation not that long ago. So Phil rang up and said, the Milford huts with the high sea swell that we're having at the time, along with quite some rain up in the foothills that had come down, there was a threat to Milford huts. So we prepared to declare to evacuate should we need to do that. So we didn't declare, but we prepared. Process itself, the declaration has to be made by a mayor or a delegated elected representative, and I think that's a key thing, that delegation we've sort of since found out can't just be a verbal thing, it's supposed to be in writing. However, we know that we've got away with it in the past, but just be aware that delegation to an other person is meant to be in writing.
Because I think with that one at the time, I think we've done that via email or something. That's obviously enough, isn't it?
Yes, you delegate
And,
too. Yeah.
and I think if you've got normal standing orders within council about delegations, then that also works. So, the best thing is to have standing orders in council around delegations rather than having to do it at the time. Controllers themselves can't declare. We cannot declare. We can only advise on it. But once it's in place, the group controller and local controllers need to do the coordination and the direction should it be required. So there's a sort of a shift in power at that point in time, and that's why they're emergency powers. So it's definitely worth understanding that happens. So and we can talk more about this, but worth thinking about, what those responsibilities of your mayor and elected officials become. And I think, the first thing is, looking after your own family and yourselves first. As elected officials, do have a think about, what it means for your family in that role that you have, and whether you can go off and do your community support and engagements like you do, while they're still potentially being impacted. Indicate your availability to the mayor and to the EOC so that they actually know that you're okay and can assist if required. You may end up being appointed as the spokesperson for the emergency. And so you may have that public-facing conversation with the public through the media. And what we try and do now is we try and do that in a collaborative way. So the mayor would get up, or an elected official would get up and do the overall response to the event, and then the controller or the emergency service partners talk about the specifics that we need our community to do. And we're finding that starts to work quite well. It was practiced a lot in Nelson, Tasman during the fires, and it seems to work quite well. You are sort of the eyes and ears of the community, and if you're hearing things that are going on, particularly things that are worrying that's happening in your community, raise them with the EOC. One of the things I would ask is don't, and I'll say this carefully, but don't make promises to your community. Sometimes they may not be possible to actually achieve, but listen to them, understand what the problems are, and bring them to the EOC, bring them to council so that we can actually work out how we're best to deal with them. That would be a plea. It means it helps us in actually responding to the event. And do not lead or run the emergency. The controller has responsibility for that. So there's that power shift. There is checks and balances in place. So if you end up with a rogue controller, someone who's gone absolutely crazy and starts doing silly things, they can be removed. So, it's not a once they're in, you're in trouble kind of thing. And then recovery. We're seeing recovery in Auckland and Hawke's Bay and Te Rāwhiti at the moment, and it's huge. It goes on for a long time, and it's incredibly draining. It's based over the four environments, so the built, the social, the economic, and the natural or the environmental space. We sometimes now also include cultural in that. It often gets interwoven between all of those. The built environment is expensive, but usually relatively easy to do. And I saw Andrew was here before, and we had to do that here with Timarua after the flooding. But the social and the economic and the natural environments, the recovery in those spaces is much more challenging and more difficult because we often don't have funding actually available to us that we can use in that space. We have to look at, we have to repurpose funding or reappropriate or get it from somewhere else or go begging to government organisations. It can be a real challenge. And we know that it goes on for a long time. The emergency might only go for 2 or 3 weeks. Recovery could actually go for years, months or years. And then look, I've just got a couple of points here. This came out of a piece of work that resilience organisations did on the board's role in crisis. So it was based on some local government boards, some national boards, and some private boards. But these were some of the comments that they came up with as 6 things to really think about to support your organisation when an emergency is occurring. And the first is be prepared. We've covered that about your own personal preparedness. Preparedness of the council itself is all important. Jump in early in the response and work as a coach, work as an advisor. support what's going on, be another sounding board, be a, you know, as an elected official, I'm seeing this in the community, I think we need to do something about it. A suggestion might be this, and work through with your controller and your staff how you might actually deliver that. Your trust and relationships are critical. I would say, you know, and I got asked the tough question at our last joint committee, you know, what did Auckland do wrong? And I'm not going to say what Auckland did wrong, it's not the right place to do that. But what I would say is I think here in Canterbury, across all of our councils, at a regional level and at a local level, we have good relationships with our mayors and elected officials and chief executives. I know Phil and Bede can have conversations, and I know Phil and Nigel can have conversations if they need to. Those relationships that are built before the emergency are absolutely critical. So encourage them and allow them to happen, because that will stop you getting in the Auckland headlights. There was no relationship between the mayor and the emergency management team, unfortunately, in Auckland when they had their first event. Be agile in decision making. You know, be prepared to change. Be prepared to make decisions, and if they don't work out how to change them. Don't be fixed on any one idea when responding to a disaster. We often talk about if we've made a decision with less than 40% of information, we've made it too soon. But if we've made it when we've got more than 70% of the information about what's going on, we've made it too late. So actually working in an area of ambiguity, and we need to be able to flex and change as we move in that disaster setting. And yeah, prepare for the long haul, and then amplify health and safety. And we certainly, as I previously mentioned, health and safety doesn't go away. We need to keep considering it in a disaster. And then just from a group perspective across the region, some of our priorities at the moment, we're about to embark on an external review of the CDM group, so we'll be getting external consultants to review how we work. That will be at the regional and local level, so we'll be doing a whole check across the whole system as to whether or not we're working effectively or how we could be better. Part of that's developing a group-wide work program. Over the last few years, we've had regional programs and local programs. They haven't been well connected together, so we're going to try and do some more connection around what it looks like across the whole region. Work in that AF8 space and that major incident planning space. So we mentioned the national framework that's being put in place. We're trying to do a similar framework so it's less hazard specific, but able to respond to those more serious events. And then we're still working through the 21 flood after action working groups. So impact and needs assessment, we're just about there with those. We're very close to, very, very close to having a consistent view of what's happened to our roads across the region, and really important to thank you as a district council for supporting that. And then in the rural space, which Phil actually leads, we're looking at really understanding the roles and responsibilities across the rural sector so we can see where there's gaps and where there's duplication before we do further work. And that capacity and workload bit will get integrated into the external review. And then lastly, the emergency management bill is ready to go to Parliament. It probably won't before, or it certainly won't have its first reading before the elections, but it's got pretty much cross-party support. So after the elections, no matter which party is in power, it'll still go ahead. And we're likely to see this select committee process start late in the year or early in the new year, and undoubtedly Timaru District Council will want to put a submission in on that. And that's up. So happy to take any questions or comments or the rules.
Questions for the team?
I guess just in your current priorities, I guess in my mind the risk to life would be at the top. I mean, it's not mentioned here
I suppose what I've got there are more sort of project-based activities as opposed to, you know, the overall priorities. And yes, risk to life is our first thing. And then we, you know, if we're actually looking at the nationalised priorities in that disaster setting, risk to life, and then we start to move down risks to property, social disorder. So there's actually a set list, and we use that for prioritisation during a disaster, but they're definitely there.
How do you, when you're doing an evacuation, how do you make contact with the people? You know, do you have access to the cell phone alert, or because I remember after the Rangitata floods, I can't remember whether it was Civil Defence or Council, but you know, both in the same in this instance, I guess, didn't know who all the people were in that area. Only had company names on the database and didn't have phone numbers. So is that something Council need to improve our database, and maybe it has since then, I don't know. Or how does that work?
Yeah, it's it becomes a challenge in those rural areas, where the property owner might be a farmer but might have 4 or 5 properties for the workers to where they live. Our easiest and quickest way of getting messages out to the community are now using that emergency mobile alert. And we used that during the Rangitata flooding to alert people. But of course, that's only going to reach people that have got a cell phone and have that cell phone turned on. Otherwise, still radio is an important mechanism for alerting people. And getting messages into our local radio stations is important. And then for smaller events, it might still be us or our partner agencies going and knocking on people's doors. And so, certainly in that Milford Hut space, there's a siren there, but it would also be knocking on people's door and saying, you've got to get out.
Just to that as well, Councillor Pye, one of the advantages about it being kept local is an actual fact, which is why the local component is important, is people do actually know that on a farmhouse there are 4 cottages and so is away, or they're not. So that's why we do emphasise in terms of that community and having that local, and brokering those relationships becomes also another way in which we do manage it, and one of the drivers for us about not getting support from central and regional government, but the responses are locally led and initiated, and so it's quite important, just as it is to know that certain roads will flood in a certain event or will be exposed. So that also is part of it, which is why we work at Paul, Phil, Lamorna, James. There is quite an effort on working on those relationships with a variety of agencies and stakeholders.
So do you access other people's databases, or can you do that? Because I remember at the time, and this was a couple of days after the event, I don't know, they might have been following up on just how you're getting on. As a farmer, we get once a year something from, I think it's Assure Quality, and it's a Westpac helicopter thing where you put down all your contact details and coordinates. So all that information is somewhere that you'd think you should be able to share it and access it, if you needed to.
Generally speaking, I would say no, unless it's been made available to us and we know about it. If it becomes known to us that database is there and it would be useful, and there is a declared state of emergency, we can. We've still got to go through like a normal court order process, but we can order that information to be released. But would have to be pretty important circumstances for us to do that. During the Christchurch earthquake, we used it to secure dental records and people's wills out of lawyers' offices that were in the cordon. So we used some of those powers at that point in time, but they're on that sort of pretty draconian end of the powers, and there's still checks and balances that we have to put in place to use them. But we could. We do rely on other organisations, in that rural space, Federated Farmers, the industry organisations like Beef and Lamb, they can often become quite important conduits for us into the farming community. And that's why we're doing this roles and responsibilities in the rural space, so that we know who has what connections in which parts of the rural space. And, you know, if we move past beef and lamb and dairy and cropping, and it's sort of into the horticultural space, it even gets bigger. But yeah.
What sort of things have we learned from Gabriel? Oh, sorry. What sort of things have we learned from Cyclone Gabriel going forward, especially around the recovery?
Oh, recovery. I think the lessons for recovery are still to come, but you know, those impacted areas where they haven't had significant emergencies like we have had in Canterbury, are not ready for this sort of thing. You know, we've had these events and we've experienced them either in the large scale as in the earthquakes or smaller scales as in the floods, to know that we've got to do these activities and to be at least ready for them in the sense of the relationships and the thoughts that we've got to do it. That's already in place. In Hawke's Bay and particularly in Auckland, they haven't experienced the scale that we've seen previously, and I suppose they don't have a mindset of what it actually takes. But lessons for recovery, I think, haven't come out yet. I know that Richard Ball, our group recovery manager, has monthly catch-ups with your recovery manager and the other regional recovery managers. And as lessons come out, he'll be talking about them. From a response point of view, so Phil and I we got deployed to Northland and supported the Kaipara district in their response. And the thing that stood out for me in small councils that haven't had much emergency activation before is their understanding of the importance of displaying information. And so, you know, when I look at our Canterbury emergency operations centres, when they're activated or when they're exercising, there's always whiteboards on the walls or there's computer screens with what's happening, what we're seeing, what we're doing. And when you go to small councils like Phil and I did, and you didn't see that, and you could see the struggles that they're having, you know, the advice to them would be get information displayed, make it so the staff that are working in that space can actually see it. Any other thoughts, Phil? You know, you were at Dargaville, you were right in the middle of it, and then you went to Hawke's Bay as well.
I think it's just reinforcing what James said, but it's just round about that. Paul talks about it in Bede as being match fit. We've had a lot of little events and medium events, and obviously, unfortunately, a couple of large events, and we actually just know what we need to do, but also our partner agencies has that trust with us as well. So I think that works both ways. I think that gets us up and going. The thing that keeps me awake at nights is we haven't had the big one yet, especially in South Canterbury. We've had a lot of medium ones, so people just assume it's a rinse and repeat of that. You know, it's not an East Valley or something like that. So what would that look like, and how would we support the response and also then drive into recovery?
Just going to add in some of the work like that working group, for instance, on the transport, is so that there's a single source of truth for people to know which roads are passable, which aren't, and so on. And you can go, and we want to integrate that to that point. So that's part of the response. The other part, which is the advocacy work of CDM, but also all of the councils in Canterbury in particular, is, and we saw that number, a stitch in time saves 9, in terms of both minimising the impact but also supporting a recovery. And that's something we need to do a lot more of, particularly around the flooding events. So, and that was why, to Councillor Scott's point about that funding for river resilience didn't come through, actually it can have a significant and direct impact when an event arises, and that's you know, a stitch in time saves nine kind of concept.
Just on that single source of truth, how does that work? Because we saw in the Hawke's Bay there's, you know, multiple sources of mistruth. So what kind of comm strategy do you have between everyone? So there is, because even between, I don't think it was here, but I've seen online of, NZ Waka Kotahi on their website will say one road's closed, but a local government one will say it's not. So how do you get that? I mean, it's never going to be perfect.
I mean, the road space is a challenge, and so this roading project that we've been doing around being able to get all the local roading data and the Waka Kotahi data all into one place, it's a milestone event as far as I'm concerned. One of the things that we do here in Canterbury is when there's an emergency on, I hold a daily briefing where the EOCs that are impacted and the partner agencies will call in once a day or twice a day, sometimes twice a day. And we use that to create that awareness of what's going on in the whole region. So it's not just, the issues that are happening here in Timaru. We make sure that everyone knows what's happening in Timaru, Waimate and say Mackenzie. And that means that if you are talking to the media, at least you have a little bit of awareness of what's happening outside of your boundaries. And so that helps with getting that one source of truth or that common theme across what we do. Sorry? We don't have media at those briefings, no. We keep them out of that so that we can have those free and frank conversations that we need. Occasionally there will be councillors involved, but that's only occasionally if they're invited into that process. But it's after that so one of the functions within an emergency operations centre is the public information management, we call it PIM, and so council communication staff are involved in those, and same at the regional level, and they're very, very good networkers on a day-to-day basis. Our comm staff across our councils tend to be talking amongst themselves all the time. And that means that in an emergency, they can just use those relationships to once again make sure that there's that awareness of messaging, and that it's never going to be perfect, it's never going to be exactly the same, but at least we're driving consistency as much as we can.
We don't invite an emergency so you can see how it works, but down in the EOC, what happens is it is, and all of the partner agencies, so you've got Kotahi, St John, Fens, Police, ourselves, ECAN, and they'll all report in, and from that a picture is built, and it is at the height of these emergencies, it's twice a day as a rule, and they do all report in, and then sort of messaging is sent out. And actually I recall something Councillor Parker's been very good at is directing people to a website where all of the single source of truth is, which really helps to say this is what it is, so that they might say that, it becomes important if a road is impassable for, in those days it was the DHB, to know if there was anybody with health needs on a particular road, and they would then inform St John, who were all there. So that's sort of how the picture is built up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Less is more, and like I have a blanket approach with those emergencies that I won't post anything, and I'll just send it all to the TDC, because then people will make comments and ask you questions, and you don't have time to respond, and so you're almost better off not, or you've done it very simply, just put them to the to the right direction. But that's the issue when locally you've got the likes of South Canterbury Today. You don't want them to make comment, and and so you need control over that. And saying that, Stephen and the team are pretty good at picking up all of that. But it's interesting. I think I just want to speak to one thing. We're quite lucky that we've sort of got separate. We're lucky to be sizeable enough. I think you spoke to the site, the Kuipras and those ones that have those challenges. But we're lucky with BAU. Like Bede's role is not involved in civil defence at all, and so he can concentrate on BAU if, you know, we've got funding issues to put to wherever we need, which is quite good. But, you know, there's some councils whereby actually their chief executive's a controller as well, which is, a fascinating challenge in its own right.
Yep.
And also, I mean, outside of Tom's earthquake, which we hope, touch wood, I've just renamed it. We've been lucky enough to have quite early warning. You know, if there's a orange warning, the team will normally flick me a message or what have you, and they keep us all up to date, which is great. And we know pretty much it's going to affect our royal wards, so it's likely to be, you know, the three of you more involved. But councillor specifically, have you got any questions? Because I think this is a key one, the opportunity now, because you will get pressure on what are you doing, you know, and it just has to be so simple. And I remember talking to the mayor in Napier at a meeting recently, and it was really frustrating for the councillors because they didn't have a role for some time because council normal BAU wasn't really operating, and so you needed to put that resource, sometimes very keen, you know, somewhere. So it's just understand what people's role is and really keep to it. So it's, you know, highly supportive as opposed to, I'm confident with our team we'll be fine, but you can imagine in some councils it can be a hindrance.
I'd say, Nigel, you know, having an internal process within Timaru of keeping all of you informed about what's going on. So not necessarily coming into the briefing in the EOC, but, you know, maybe afterwards, you know, Bede or Phil or the controller giving you a brief about what's going on so that, you know, you can relay stuff to your constituencies but also get information back would be a very good practice thing to do.
I always like to follow up with, if you see something out in the community that is happening, don't hesitate to ring me. Because once again, our district is quite diverse and quite expansive. So sometimes it's a sunny day here and it's a howling nor'wester down the Rangitata Gorge or down the Rangitata, and we don't know what is happening. So once again, we've got good connections across our partner agencies, but sometimes that's heads up of this forecast looks unusual or this event is not behaving the way it should, is once again, forewarned is forearmed as well. I like to think I'm quite proactive with engaging with the controllers and the mayor and the CE to say, hey, look, something's bubbling away, I'm not comfortable, but we're just watching it to try and give that reassurance up and down and across.
Yeah, that's right, Phil. Actually, it was the December 2019, the island was cut in half. We couldn't get across anywhere, and within a few hundred metres of the Rangitata, the irrigators are going because it's so dry. So it does actually, to Phil's point, you know, you get that irony of it. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Just got one quick question. Just regarding events, like normally you look at flooding and earthquakes and stuff, wildfires. Now we're having more and more of these sudden downpours, and they cause real issues. Like, you know, we're not immune to it. We had one at Peel Forest, had 87 mils of rain in an hour, just about washed the new fire station away. Block culvert could have been the reason why. A few other things, but the Kowhai stream, where it's renowned for danger, there's been people killed there before through flooding. How much does that play on your guys' minds now? Because that must be really concerning.
It's huge. You know, we are definitely seeing the Met Service put more orange warnings, you know, out into public, and we're having a lot more engagement with the Met Service before red warnings are being done. So most of the time they don't put a red warning directly in place without having a conversation with us. Sometimes they do, and that's usually quite urgent, but most of the time they'll actually have a conversation with us around, you know, what else is happening in the region that would mean we've got to think more about it. So, you know, if we've had a couple of days of orange rain, for example, and then there's another, you know, expected orange warning coming at the end of the week, say, they may actually have a conversation with us and turn that into a red because they know the ground's already super saturated and it is actually, you know, increased potential for risk of flooding. So that's one thing that happens. as far as, these heavier downpours in localised areas or even spread out, I'm not sure if I've got an easy answer to that, but, everything is indicating that we'll see more of it, and we just need to be ready for it. And, it is an issue, but, if your civil defence teams are activated, let's say 40 or 50 days of the year, that's probably a loss of double that in actual work that they can actually do. So, these events happening time after time are actually having a compounding effect on the actual work that we need to get to. So, yeah, we will see more. That's almost certain.
I was just going to say, I know we have spoken, Councillor Oliver, but those sudden onset events, the thunderstorms, that really short, sharp, that's back to community to acknowledge those risks themselves and the environment they live in, and obviously back to the emergency services to do that initial response. Then I'm hopeful that that's when we then get looped into something has happened in Peel Forest or something that has happened here, and we can then step in and support. But it's very hard for us to respond immediately because we haven't got a response component. And that's where fire and emergency and police and all those other response agencies do that great work. But we need to be looped into that it is happening. But local knows best. We keep being told that, and I totally believe it. So once again, if you see a big cloud above your house, one would suggest it's about to rain.
Oh, sorry, just one last question, if I may. What about, because civil defence has a voluntary nature to it, doesn't it, with volunteers from the community? So are you like every other voluntary organisation up and down the country that struggles for volunteers, or are you pretty well placed?
We never have enough volunteers. Lamorna's doing a great job with bolstering the teams in Geraldine, Waimeti, Geraldine, Tabuka and Pleasant Point, and then we've got a response team here in Timaru that can do a wee bit more advanced stuff. But we need more, and it's how we engage with them, how we support them, how we train them, because sometimes with volunteers, they actually want action. So if we don't have anything for a year, they go looking for it somewhere else or somewhere to fulfil their volunteerism need. And then on the flip side, they get too much. And they say, oh no, I only thought I'd only be doing a couple of days, a year. So short story, yes, we would like to have more, but it's that balancing act of keeping them engaged, trained to a level that we're comfortable to utilise them, and how they can support the community.
Can I just add something? I know Phil I was just saying, as a controller and as practitioners, as it were, we often talk about the confusion around civil defence because it's an abstract concept for most people, and we'll say, I didn't see civil defence, and then Phil will say, well, did you see police? Did they knock on your door? Oh yeah, no, they came and saw us, yeah. Did you see somebody from, I don't know, the rural support sort of agency, what they call?
Support trust.
Oh yeah, no, they came and saw us as well. And they just don't realise actually that is civil defence. Civil defence is a coordination, it's a management framework. So it's an abstract concept. It's not, there isn't some army of people putting a pair of undies over their trousers and running out the door. We just have to make sure in local government that we transmit that actually you are civil defence. The people you talk to, they are civil defence. And there's personal responsibility in there as well to be prepared and be resilient. As most rural communities are, but we townies struggle a bit more with it. But we should be selling that message. So I just wanted to say that. If you're out and about, cheers.
Good point.
Anything further? No, that was good. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. Again, thanks Tom and thanks James. That's really helpful. Unfortunately, as soon as we normally get educated on these things, so everyone touch wood and test it, do we?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, and like if any further civil defence emergency management questions come up in the future, I'm more than happy to help support Phil with those conversations with you if you want. So, yeah, thank you.